They say no one notices the caregiver, not the patients, not the doctors, not even the world. We're the quiet ones who mop up the tears, wipe the spills, and carry the weight no one wants to lift. But I've never minded the shadows. I've always found a strange kind of comfort in silence. My name is Arham, and I was just another nameless face in a sea of blue scrubs. Or so I thought. That morning started like any other. A gray sky outside the window, the buzzing of machines inside, fluorescent lights humming above me. I reported for my shift at Havencrest Medical Center, a place that smells permanently of antiseptic and tired hope. I walked past the pediatric ward, past the cancer wing, and turned into Ward 3B, the long-term care unit. That's where I met him. Mr. Faisal Rahman, 78 years old, stroke survivor. Technically alive, but trapped inside a body that no longer listened to him. He hadn't spoken in nearly 5 months. His eyes stayed closed, but his heart still beat slowly, stubbornly. To everyone else, he was just another bedbound patient waiting for his final breath. To me, he became something more. I don't know why I felt drawn to him. Maybe it was the way his hand always rested open on the blanket, as if still waiting for someone to hold it. Or the faded photograph taped to the edge of his monitor of a young man, smiling in a graduation gown. Maybe it was the silence. You see, I've always believed that silence speaks, sometimes louder than words. So I began to sing, nothing dramatic, just softly. Familiar tunes. Old lullabies, gentle verses from poems I learned as a child, and sometimes, softly, under my breath, a few lines of the Quran, not loudly enough for others to hear, but enough, I hoped, to reach him. At first, I wasn't sure if it made any difference. He didn't flinch, he didn't stir, but I kept going. Every day. For weeks. I'd wipe his forehead, change his bedding, massage his hands, and hum while doing it. And then, something changed. It was so subtle I almost missed it. One morning, as I finished humming the final verse of an old folk song, I saw a single tear slipping from the corner of his eye. My breath caught. I leaned closer. Mr. Faisal, did you hear that? Nothing. But that tear was real. And after that, it kept happening. I started noticing tiny things. His fingers would twitch when I sang certain melodies. His lips would quiver when I whispered prayers. I began to wonder, was he still in there? Trapped, but listening? The doctor said it was neurological. Involuntary responses, they called them. But I didn't care what they said. Something inside him was alive. And I wasn't going to let the world forget that. One day, as I sang quietly while adjusting his blanket, I felt it again, that unmistakable feeling of being watched. I looked. Over my shoulder, a man stood at the doorway. Tall, well-dressed, navy suit, white shirt, mid-30s, maybe. His jaw was clenched, his eyes unreadable. He didn't step in. He just stood there watching. For a second, I froze. Then I nodded politely. Are you here for someone? He didn't answer. Just stared at Mr. Faisal. His eyes flickered to me for a moment, studying me, but he said nothing, and turned to walk away. Weird, I thought. But in hospitals, you learn not to ask too many questions. He came again the next day. Same suit, same silence. He'd linger in the hallway, just out of sight. Watching, listening, especially when I sang. I didn't know it yet, but that silent man was about to change my life forever. The silent man became a routine. Every day around 4 p.m., like clockwork, he'd appear, never entering the room, never speaking, just standing there in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Mr. Faisal. As I worked beside the bed. At first, I thought he might be a family member too afraid to engage, or perhaps someone from administration quietly auditing patient care. But his presence carried weight, not authority, but emotion. Something deeper, One day, I finished cleaning Mr. Faisal's hands and, as always, sang a few lines of an old Urdu lullaby my mother used to hum when I had nightmares as a child. As I looked up, I caught a glimpse of the man again, but this time, he wasn't standing still. He was leaning against the wall, one hand over his mouth, eyes glistening. He looked away when he noticed me watching. That's when I decided to step out and speak to him. "Excuse me," I said gently. "Are you by any chance related to Mr. Faisal?" The man looked at me for a long, still moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and clipped, as if unused to vulnerability. "He's my father." There was silence between us for a heartbeat. I nodded slowly. "I didn't know. He's been here for months, and no one's ever visited." His jaw tightened. "I've been busy," that's all he said. But the way he said it, full of guilt wrapped in steel, it told me more than his words ever could. I extended my hand. "I'm Arham. I take care of your father." He shook it, firm and formal. Zion. That name, it struck something in my memory. Zion Faisal. I'd heard of him. A tech mogul, Forbes under 40, founder of a health tech startup worth millions. He was featured on magazines, panels, TED Talks. And yet, here he was, standing in a dim hospital hallway, looking like a lost child. "He seems to respond to your singing," he said quietly. I smiled. "Yeah, I've noticed that too. I think he hears us." Somewhere deep inside, Zion didn't answer. But that day, he didn't walk away either. He stood there, watching, until my shift ended. Over the next few days, something shifted. Zion began entering the room. Not by much, just a few steps inside, always standing at a respectful distance. He wouldn't speak to his father, but he'd listen, watch, and sometimes I'd catch him recording videos on his phone. I didn't ask why. Honestly, I didn't need to. People deal with pain in strange ways. For some, it's prayer. For others, silence. For Zion, it was observation capturing moments he couldn't bring himself to participate in yet. One day, as I prepared a warm towel for Mr. Faisal's arms, Zion finally spoke. "Why do you do it?" he asked. I looked up. "Do what? Sing? Talk to him. Treat him like he's listening." I paused, then said, "Because maybe he is." Zion looked at me, really looked. "But even if he's not?" I shrugged. "Then I'm just making sure no one leaves this world feeling unloved." He didn't reply, but after that day, he began pulling up a chair. A week later, I walked into the room and found something unusual. Zion was sitting at his father's bedside, holding his hand. That might not sound remarkable to most, but for someone like him, a man of numbers, deadlines, headlines, it was monumental. He looked up as I entered, almost embarrassed. I just thought maybe it was time I said something," he muttered. I smiled and busied myself with the 4 tubes to give him privacy. But I heard what he whispered next. "I'm sorry, Abu, for being away, for not calling, for everything." A pause. "You always told me that people matter more than success." I didn't listen. I chased the world and forgot the one who gave me mine. His voice broke. "I miss you." I felt my chest tighten. I'd seen miracles happen in hospitals, hearts restart, lungs revive, but this was something rarer. A son returning to a father, not physically, but emotionally. From that day, Zion came earlier, stayed longer, and little by little, he began to talk more about his childhood, about the mango tree in their old house, about the first time his father taught him how to ride a bicycle. It was as if, piece by piece, he was trying to bring his father back, not through medicine, but through memory. One evening, as I was leaving, Zion stopped me. "Arham," he said, "can I show you something?" He pulled out his phone and opened a folder. There were dozens of videos of me singing. of his father's faint facial twitches, of our quiet moments in the room. "I've been recording these," he admitted. At first, I didn't know why. I just needed to hold on to something. But then, I started watching them late at night, and something changed. He paused. They reminded me of who I used to be. Before the money, before the companies, before the headlines. His voice grew softer. "Watching you care for my father, it healed something in me I didn't even know was broken." I didn't know what to say. I'd never thought of myself as someone who could heal others. I was just a caregiver. But that night, I realized something. Sometimes, the quietest acts, the unnoticed gestures, have the loudest impact. A week later, Mr. Faisal's condition worsened. His heart rate slowed, oxygen levels dropped, and the doctors warned us the end was near. Zion didn't leave his side. Neither did I, but in those final hours, he said something that caught me completely off guard. "When this ends," he said, "I want to talk to you about something important." I nodded, not pressing. Mr. Faisal's breathing became shallow. Machines beeped slower. The room grew heavier with finality. That night, as I sang a soft old Sufi melody, one I'd never sung before, but felt compelled to, Mr. Faisal opened his eyes. Just barely. His gaze was hazy, unfocused. But he was there. Zion jumped to his feet. "Abu?" A faint smile tugged at Mr. Faisal's lips. He didn't speak, but his eyes rested on his son, then on me. Then a tear. And finally, peace. He passed away minutes later with his son holding one hand and me holding the other. The next morning, Zion called me outside the hospital. "I want to offer you something," he said. I braced myself for a thank you gift or maybe a donation in his father's name, but instead he said, "Join me." "What?" "I'm building a new kind of healthcare model. Something human, real, focused on dignity, not profit. And I want you to help me lead it." I laughed nervously. "Zion, I'm a caregiver. I don't have a degree in business or management." He smiled. "You have something better. Compassion, vision, integrity. That's what real leadership looks like." I didn't give him an answer right away, but that night, as I sat alone in the now empty Ward 3B, I thought about Mr. Faisal, about the man in the hallway, and the quiet songs that had stitched a family back together, and I realized maybe my place wasn't just by one bedside anymore. Maybe it was time to care on a larger scale. It took me 3 days to give Zian my answer. 3 days of pacing the narrow corridors of the hospital, of sitting at the same bench outside Ward 3B where I used to sip tea on breaks, and thinking about all the years I'd spent living life on the margins. What did I know about running anything? I was a caregiver. A good one, yes, but I didn't have a fancy degree, a shiny resume, or the confidence of someone who belonged in board meetings. My entire world had always been about service, cleaning wounds, comforting the forgotten, singing to those who couldn't speak for themselves. But then I remembered Mr. Faisal's final glance, the look in his eyes just before he passed, as if he was trying to say, "Don't stop now, ARHAM. So I called Zion. "I'm in," I told him. He didn't ask for clarification. He just said, "Good. Let's change some lives." That's how I found myself inside Orion Healthcare's headquarters, an ultra-modern glass building in the center of the city, far from the cold beige walls of Havencrest Medical Center. Remember walking into the elevator on my first day, dressed in a button-up shirt that felt too stiff, my shoes squeaking on the marble floor. I didn't look like I belonged. Everyone else looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. But Zion had insisted, "You're not here to fit in. You're here to lead with heart." And so I did what I always did. I listened. I learned. And I led the only way I knew how, by caring. Zayn introduced me not as an assistant or junior partner, but as director of compassionate programs, a new department focused on reimagining how healthcare was delivered to the underprivileged. He didn't want me to manage spreadsheets. He wanted me to build connection. Our mission was simple but radical. Create clinics in underserved communities. Staff them with people trained not just in medicine, but in empathy. We called it the Soul Health Initiative. My first project was in a neglected part of the city called Saranpura, a place where families lived in tin sheds, where children had never seen a real doctor, and where health care meant a dusty box of expired pills from a local vendor. When I arrived, I didn't carry a clipboard, I carried a stool. I sat with people. I listened to their stories. I asked mothers what they feared most about their children's health. I asked fathers what they wished they could afford. I talked to school teachers, barbers, fruit sellers, and I sang, just like I had in Ward 3B. Old songs. Soothing words. To calm anxious mothers as their babies got vaccinated. To ease the minds of elders as we treated their arthritis. At first, my staff thought I was strange. Then, they started humming along. Something beautiful was happening. Few weeks later, I brought Zion to visit the clinic. He stood in silence as children ran past us, laughing. Mothers waved from benches. An old man handed him a mango and thanks ... This ... Zion whispered, ... is what I wanted all along. You had the resources, I said. You just needed the reason. He looked at me. No, I needed you. By the end of that year, we had opened 6 community clinics. Word was spreading. Donors began paying attention. Volunteers signed up. Journalists started calling it the most human revolution in healthcare. But it wasn't all easy. Behind the success were long nights, unexpected failures, budget overruns, political pushback, and even threats from private hospitals who feared we were disrupting the system too much. One night, after a particularly draining week of setbacks, I sat on the floor of my apartment, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering if I'd made a mistake. I remembered the hospital, the stillness of Mr. Faisal's room, the way his hand had twitched at the sound of music. And I whispered to myself, "Don't stop now." Then came a moment that would forever define our journey. We had just opened a mobile unit that traveled to remote mountain villages. One day, during a trip to Mirza Valley, we came across a boy maybe 9 or 10 lying on a thin cot. His name was Rafe. His mother thought he was cursed. He hadn't spoken in 2 years. He didn't make eye contact. Villagers avoided him. But when I approached, something familiar stirred in me. I sat beside him, took his hand, and began humming, just like I had with Mr. Fazal. The boy didn't respond. Not that day, not the next. But on the 4th day, as I began the same tune again, Rafe blinked, then turned his head slightly toward me. His lips moved. It wasn't much, just a whisper. But it was a word. Amy. His mother fell to her knees and sobbed. The entire valley witnessed it. And overnight, the Soul Health Initiative became a movement. We began training a new generation of caregivers, not just in medicine, but in presence. In how to listen, how to comfort, how to be seen even when society looks away. And the most ironic part? The man funding it all, the tech mogul, the millionaire Zion Faisal, became less like a boss and more like a brother. He'd often say, "You healed my father. And then you healed me." But what he didn't know was that they healed me, too, because for the first time in my life, I was more than a hospital worker. I was proof that one person, just one, could change the direction of someone else's life, not by doing something extraordinary, but by simply caring when no one else did. As the months turned into a year, Zion surprised me with something else. He had been compiling all the video recordings, those clips of me singing to his father, the small interactions, even our first awkward conversation in the hallway. he'd made a documentary. He called it The Quiet Song That Healed Us. When it premiered at a health tech conference in Dubai, the crowd gave it a 10-minute standing ovation. And as the credits rolled, I saw my name appear on screen, not as a caregiver, not as a director, but simply as Arham, the man who listened. That night, Zion and I stood outside under the stars, letting the cool wind carry away the noise of applause and flashing cameras. "Do you ever miss the hospital?" he asked. I smiled. "Every day. But now I carry it with me." We stood in silence for a moment before he added, "You know, I used to believe technology could save everything. And now?" I asked. "Now I know," he said softly, "that sometimes it's just a song, and someone willing to sing it." With every new sunrise, our vision grew: more clinics, more outreach, more lives touched. Within just 8 months, the Soul Health Initiative had expanded to 9 cities, 3 mobile units, and a nationwide awareness campaign about emotional caregiving. But as I've learned the hard way, the higher you rise, the stronger the winds become. And we never saw the storm coming. It started with whispers. Some local, private hospitals, threatened by our growing influence, began questioning the legitimacy of our work. Articles popped up online. Is the Soul Health model sustainable? Compassion over competence? Unqualified caregivers at the helm of healthcare? I became a target. "Not Zion, me. You're just a nurse aide," one editorial blasted. "What right do you have to influence national healthcare decisions?" At first, I ignored it. I told myself, let the work speak. But then, the Ministry of Health launched an audit. They froze funding to 2 of our new clinics. Volunteers pulled out. Our public trust, once sky high, began to shake. I met with Zion in his office one night, empty coffee mugs, late emails, eyes heavy with worry. "I'm sorry," I said, barely above a whisper. "This is my fault. If you'd chosen someone with a medical degree to lead, don't," he cut in sharply. "Don't do that." He leaned forward. "You know what I see when I look at you, Arham? Not a title, not a job role. I see proof that humanity still works." I tried to believe him, but doubt had crept in. It stayed with me during every clinic meeting, every press interaction, and worse, it crept into my patients' eyes. Their trust so complete, once now clouded by confusion and fear, and then came the blow that shattered everything. A child 6 years old died at one of our rural clinics due to a delayed ambulance. Though it was a government-run transport issue, the media placed the blame on us. Headlines exploded. Soul Health's shine dims after tragedy. Hero caregiver or just lucky? I didn't sleep for days. That child's name was Yasser. His mother had thanked me hours before for giving them hope. I remember her eyes as they left the clinic filled with light. And I remember her screams when they brought his lifeless body back. Zayn wanted to hold a press conference, but I said, "No. This time let me speak." 2 days later, I stood in front of a room full of reporters. Flashbulbs, microphones, eyes ready to dissect. I looked into the cameras and told the truth. I am not a doctor. I never claimed to be. I'm a caregiver. A man who sat beside an old stranger and sang because silence was too cruel to ignore. That act brought a son back to his father. That son changed the world for others, but I never pretended to be more than what I am. This movement was never about me. It was about you. The people forgotten by broken systems. The families who feel invisible inside clinics. We lost a child last week. I will never forget Yasser. His name will live in every decision we make from now on, but please, don't let one tragedy blind you to 1,000 recoveries. Don't let one headline erase hundreds of healed hearts. We didn't start Soul Health to be perfect. We started it to care. When no one else would, there was silence. And then, a standing ovation. It didn't fix everything, but it changed the narrative. Donors returned. Clinics reopened. And slowly, the storm began to pass, but I had changed. The weight of leadership wasn't something I had trained for. The cost of compassion wasn't listed in any handbook, and the guilt stayed. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went back to the hospital, back to Ward 3B. It had been almost 2 years since Mr. Faisal passed away. The room had changed, new paint, new machines, but the soul of the place, it was the same. I sat in the empty chair beside the bed, placed my hands where his once rested, and sang, quietly, not for anyone else, just for me. It was like returning to the origin of everything, the song that started the story, and as I hummed the final line, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Zian found me there later that night. Still your sanctuary, huh? He said. I nodded. We sat quietly for a while, just listening to the distant beeps and footsteps echoing in the corridor. Then he said, I think we're ready. For what? I asked. For the next step. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document, a proposal, an expansion plan. Not just more clinics, but a full university. An institute dedicated to training compassionate healthcare workers, people like me. Not just on how to give an injection, but how to hold a hand. Not just how to diagnose, but how to be present, and he wanted me to head it. The very idea felt surreal. I stared at the page, then at him. I failed during the storm, I said. Softly. You stood during it, he replied. That night, I signed the papers. The Faisal Arham Institute of Compassionate Care was born. Its motto? Every life deserves to be seen, not just saved. We broke ground a few months later. Donors came from all over the world. Nurses, caregivers, even doctors applied to learn the Yarham method, a term I never fully accepted. I wasn't a method. I was just a man who sang softly to someone no one else remembered. And yet now, students walk down halls bearing my name. They learn not just from textbooks, but from stories. They're taught to observe not just vitals but souls. And every new batch begins their journey with a song and anthem of hope, hummed across every hallway of the institute. It still brings me to tears. The inauguration day of the Faisal Arham Institute of Compassionate Care was unlike anything I'd ever imagined for my life. Politicians, international NGOs, journalists, and even former patients filled the amphitheater we had set up under a soft golden canopy. The building behind us shimmered clean, modern, with wide-open spaces and sunlit classrooms. But that wasn't what made it beautiful. What made it beautiful was that every wall, every corridor, every corner had been designed not for efficiency, but for humanity. Instead of sterile white walls, the institute glowed with warm colors. Instead of corridors that echoed with silence, speakers softly played healing music. And instead of framed degrees, the main hallway was lined with photos not of founders or donors, but of patients. Real people. Real faces. Real stories. I stood backstage, in a modest black suit, watching the crowd gather. Zion stood beside me, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked calm, confident, still the business tycoon the world admired, but his eyes were different now. Softer, lighter. This is your day, he said. I shook my head. This is our day. Your father's, yours, mine. And every forgotten soul who was ever seen because someone cared enough to look. He nodded. The master of ceremonies called my name. My hands trembled slightly as I stepped up to the podium. For a moment, I said nothing. I looked out into the sea of faces, the cameras, the eager eyes, and then I spoke. I was never meant to stand here. I was meant to stand there by a hospital bed, behind the curtain, in the quiet. That was where I found my voice, singing to a man who couldn't speak. And today, we begin something powerful, not because we are powerful people, but because we believe in powerful values. The world doesn't need more hospitals. It needs more healers. People who don't just treat illness, but restore dignity. This institute is not built on concrete and steel. It's built on a single belief that no life is ever too small to matter. The applause was long and loud. But what moved me most was when the crowd stood in silence, and then softly began humming the lullaby I used to sing inward. 3B Zion had arranged it with the choir. I had to turn away to hide the tears from. That day, everything accelerated. Our first class had only 40 students. Nurses, nursing assistants, and community caregivers from across Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, even a few from the UK and Canada. The youngest was 19. The oldest was 57. They came not for jobs but for purpose. Our curriculum was groundbreaking. Medical ethics through storytelling, the science of listening, spiritual comfort and palliative care, music and memory and neurological recovery. Grief as a teacher. We brought in therapists, poets, monks, and doctors. Classes took place under trees, in silence, in song, in simulation. Every graduate would leave not just with a certificate but with a new understanding of what it meant to be present. I still taught every week, not from behind a desk but from the circle, with my sleeves rolled up, sometimes barefoot, sometimes singing, always listening. And every time a student asked, "Sir, what's the most important thing you've learned in your journey?" I always said the same thing, that people don't remember your knowledge. They remember how you made them feel. 6 months into the first academic year, we received an invitation, the World Health Compassion Forum, to be held in Geneva. Zion and I were both asked to speak not as founders, but as transformers. Apparently, our model had inspired ripples in other countries. Spain had opened its first soul care clinic. South Africa was launching a similar caregiver program. The world was listening, but it was something else that made my heart skip. The organizers wanted me to perform, to sing. They said, "Whatever started your story." At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a performer. I wasn't trained. I was just, me. But Zion looked at me and said, "The world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more realness. That's your gift, Arham." The stage in Geneva was massive. Thousands in the audience. Lights blinding. Cameras rolling live to millions. But as I stood there, alone with a mic in hand, I thought of one room. One bed. One old man whose heart still beat in my memory. I closed my eyes and sang softly, just like before. No music. No instruments. Just voice and soul. The hall went completely still. By the time I opened my eyes, I saw rows of people wiping tears. Doctors, CEOs, nurses, students. People of every color and background. I didn't speak after the song. I just bowed and left the stage. The next day, our inbox was flooded. Hundreds of hospitals wanted to partner. Thousands of caregivers wanted to train. And one message, handwritten on a torn scrap of paper left in my hotel room, read, "I watched my mother die alone last year. I wish someone like you had been there. Thank you for making me believe we can be better." That night in Geneva, I stood on the balcony of my hotel and looked at the stars. Zion came out with 2 cups of tea, no sugar, just how I liked it. He handed me one and said, "You know, if my father were alive today," I smiled, "he'd tell you to fix your tie and probably tell me to shave." We laughed. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You didn't just change healthcare, Arham. You changed how we love strangers." But all revolutions, no matter how pure, must face trials. And ours was about to face its biggest one yet. One we didn't see coming. One we couldn't stop. One that would test everything we had built. Because love even in its purest form, sometimes comes with heartbreak. The first sign was small. I'd forget simple things, a name, a key, a meeting I swore I scheduled. I brushed it off. Stress, maybe, or too many cups of late-night chai. The institute was growing rapidly, and I was still teaching, mentoring, traveling, writing. Sleep was a luxury, but then came the headaches, the dizzy spells, the moments I'd stare at my own reflection and not recognize my own eyes. Zion noticed it before I did. Arham, you've lost weight. When was your last checkup? I laughed it off. Checkup? Who has time for that? He didn't laugh back. The test results came in on a gray Thursday. I sat in the doctor's office, the same hospital, where I had once cleaned floors and whispered songs into the ears of dying patients. Now I was the one sitting quietly, trying not to look afraid. The doctor cleared his throat. It's early stage, he began, but aggressive. I didn't hear the next words clearly, something about neurons, degeneration, possible treatments. All I heard was the phrase, early onset Parkinson's. I nodded like I understood, but inside, I felt the walls closing in. Me? The one who taught others how to be calm in chaos. The one who built clinics to help others walk again, speak again, smile again. Now, I would begin to lose those very things. I didn't tell anyone for weeks. I kept teaching, kept smiling, kept showing up. But late at night, when the halls were empty and the music had faded, I'd sit on the floor of my office and cry. It wasn't the disease I feared. It was being forgotten. The irony hit hard. I had dedicated my life to making others feel seen. And now I was terrified of fading into the background, of becoming the man I once cared for. Silent, still, forgotten. Eventually, I told Zion. He didn't say a word at first. Just sat beside me on the clinic bench, eyes glassy. Then he asked softly, "What do you want to do?" I looked at him. I want to finish the song. In the months that followed, I began preparing to step down from active duties. But I didn't retreat. I leaned in harder than ever. I recorded every lecture I'd ever given. Wrote a book, part memoir, part training manual called The Art of Being There. I trained my successor, a brilliant nurse from Quetta named Sadia, whose hands reminded me of my mother's, gentle but firm, and I made one final wish. I want to return to the beginning. Zion understood immediately. The final clinic we opened under my leadership was in Rahim Yar Khan, just a few kilometers from the village where I was born. A dusty little place with mango groves and dirt roads and one half broken school building. We renovated it, painted it with bright colors, filled it with beds, books, music, and laughter. When we cut the ribbon, a little boy tugged on my kurta and asked, "Uncle, are you a doctor?" I smiled and knelt down. "No, beta," I said. "I'm a singer who forgot to stop singing." He laughed and ran off. That moment, pure, simple, joyful, was everything. Then came my final class. Students from across the world had flown in for a special week of master classes. It wasn't advertised, no media. Just the 40 of us in a circle under the neem tree at sunset. I didn't teach from notes. I just spoke. I told them everything, the fear, the hope, the way a single quiet song had changed not just a man, not just a family, but an entire system. I told them, don't chase the spotlight, chase the heartbeat. When you walk into a room, look for the eyes no one is looking at. When you treat someone, remember their name, their story, their silence. And when the world tells you that empathy is weakness, prove them wrong, again and again. And finally, for the last time in my career, I sang the same lullaby. Soft, warm, steady. When I opened my eyes, I saw 40 students crying, and I knew the work would live on. A few months later, my symptoms worsened. I began to need help walking. My hands trembled when I tried to pour tea. My speech slurred when I was tired. And yet, I was happy, because the Institute was thriving, because Sadia had launched a new program for pediatric empathy, because Zion had secured funding to take Soul Health Global. And because, despite everything, I was still seeing Zayn visited often. He'd help me into the garden, where we'd sit on a bench watching the students pass by, laughing. One day, he said, "You know, I used to think money was the greatest power. And now?" I asked. He looked at me. "Now I know, it's love." The last time I spoke publicly was at the graduation ceremony of the 7th batch. They wheeled me onto the stage. I wasn't embarrassed. I had lived more lives in one than most people did in 10. The crowd stood. The applause lasted minutes. I simply said, "Care is the only thing that multiplies the more you give it away. Don't be afraid to give too much. There's always more inside you than you think." I passed away quietly in my sleep. One winter morning, blankets pulled up to my chin, sunlight falling across my face. Just the way I always hoped. Warm, loved, at peace. But I didn't leave alone. Because in clinics across countries, in classrooms filled with dreamers, in hospitals where caregivers now sing softly to the dying, I remain, not as a statue, not as a name on a wall, but as a presence, a whisper, a hand on a shoulder, a lullaby in a quiet room. Epilogue, narrated by Zion Faisal. He was never just a caregiver. He was a healer of souls. The world may remember him as the founder of Soul Health, but to me, he will always be the man who sang my father back to life.